Wander Wealthy Podcast, episode 260. Welcome to the Wander Wealthy Podcast. My name is Tess. I'm the host of this show, founder of Wander Wealthy, and financial coach turned business coach for all my fellow money coaches out in the world. This podcast is helping you to learn how to build a life-changing coaching program, be a better coach, and also build a business that is sustainable, that is scalable, and that you love. Whether that's a full-time business, a part-time side hustle, whatever it is, we're here to help money coaches do all the business things and also delight their clients and become better coaches in the process. And this week, we're going to be focusing on that because I wanted to share 6 challenging financial coaching scenarios or situations and how to handle them. I think that as coaches, there's not a lot of training out there. There are some certification programs, but we don't always know how to handle the business side of things. And even as you take steps into being a coach, you might imagine certain situations coming up, or you might actually be experiencing some of these situations. And I want to share with you, some ways that you can navigate them and ultimately be a better coach by knowing how to do just that. So we're going to dive into that today. Before we get into it, just a quick reminder that the Wealthy Coach Blueprint, which is my 12-week intimate one-on-one coaching program for money coaches, new, aspiring, and even seasoned, is open for enrollment. And we're kind of doing a rolling enrollment period where you can get in to join over the spring and summer term. Like I said, this is a 3-month program, so just kind of start from where you're at today and think about 3 months out. But it's open for you to join until about the end of March, I would say. So we do have some time, but I'm only taking on a handful of clients, and that means that time is ticking and spots are being, taken up. So if you're thinking about joining us in this round, this is potentially the last opportunity to join for the year of 2022 because of some new things that are coming down the pipe, which I'll be announcing soon. So now's your chance. Head to wanderwealthy.com/blueprint to find out more about the program. But in short, we help you build your life-changing coaching program, learn about the business of building a money coaching business, and of course, how to deliver that program and get clients and make a greater income and a bigger impact in the world. So wanderwealthy.com/blueprint to learn more and fill out the application, and then we can take that next step forward. All right, let's dive into these tricky financial coaching scenarios. And primarily we're looking at situations with your clients and how to kind of navigate them, how to handle them. So the very first scenario that I came up with, and this is a list that I just kind of sat down and said, okay, what are the most common things I see in my business? And also the most common things that my clients have faced where we've been able to kind of workshop through and figure out how to handle those. So if you have other tricky scenarios that you want to toss my way, or even things that you are making up in your mind that are kind of keeping you from taking that big step towards either launching your money coaching program or taking on more clients, feel free to send them my way. I'd love to make kind of a part 2 to this episode because I think that a lot of us kind of make up problems in our mind or think I wouldn't know how to handle that, therefore I can't do this. And that might just not be the case. The likelihood of that happening may be very small, as well as, maybe that it's almost impossible for that thing to happen, whatever it is. So I'd love for you to send that over to me. The easiest way is to reach out to me on Instagram. I'm Tess_Wicks, and just be like, hey, listen to episode 260, and I'd love to submit a couple additional scenarios for you to talk through. I'd love to kind of get your point of view or perspective on that, and that will let me know that we can create a part 2 to this. But starting with number 1 that I have is probably the first one, most likely the most common. It's kind of an assumption that your client could go into or that just will naturally occur because of how taboo the subject of money can be for most people. And that is that your client might feel embarrassed or shameful of their spending or overall financial situation when they work with you, or when, you're first starting to look at their numbers. And one of the ways to be able to handle this and actually avoid the situation from happening is I like to kind of set the tone before the client and I even start digging into those numbers or digging into those results and kind of uncovering what's going on. A lot of what I do and what I advise my clients on doing, my money coaching clients, is almost to set that tone in the sales conversation, because a big part of that sales conversation might be that your potential client is sort of opening up about these things. And so I usually am very adamant in that sales conversation to thank the client for being open and for being willing to share that with me, and to acknowledge that might not feel like a normal thing, but to let them know that this is a safe space for them to share all of what is going on without that shame. And, to let them know even ahead of time, or to ask for permission during that call. Like, is it okay with you if I ask you some questions about your finances, with the knowledge that, this is a safe place where your answers will not be shared, and also that there is no right or wrong answer, that we are really here to problem solve as opposed to problem judge. And so those are a couple different options that you can utilize even in the sales call, as early as the sales call. But obviously you can regain that permission and that consent in each of your coaching calls by kind of opening up with that and almost doing like an intention setting exercise at the forefront, where you're coming into the call and kind of reminding them, like re-asking for that permission, but also reminding them what kind of space you're creating here. I think another good thing or way you could go about this is in the way that I coach and have my clients build their programs, is we build curriculum to support the coaching sessions. And one of your earlier stages, probably the first phase of your curriculum, you might have your clients actually go through that before your first session. And one of those early lessons could be just all about addressing the embarrassment or shame that someone might feel opening up about their financial situation and how they may have gotten into this financial situation, or being open about their spending. And I think it can be really good to kind of set the tone there, so that, obviously you have something that's pre-recorded, that's honest, but that is also making sure that you're like ticking that box, because it's also easy to forget, right? As a money coach, we almost take it for granted that like talking about money is normal and expected. And yeah, it's just like super easy for us, but we forget that it might not be as easy or normal for someone else. So making sure you have that kind of reminder in place by putting it in the curriculum that your client would get access to. Or you could even do this in any kind of onboarding material or agreement that they might sign, so they can see that you're making that effort and you're kind of setting that tone earlier on. So I would definitely attempt to do things like that almost preventatively. But then, there's also the opportunity or, chance that a client will experience those feelings later on, almost just forgetting that that's the space you had agreed to create together for them and for their sake. And so again, kind of reminding them at the beginning of each call, just letting them know, this is a safe space. There's no judgment involved, because I am not a problem judger. I'm a problem solver, and we are in this together to solve that problem, or to work on those habits and behaviors. And, just to kind of reset the tone every single time you go into the call. And then there's, of course, the moments where the client is like, oh, I'm embarrassed, or I'm ashamed, or I've been avoiding telling you this. And that's a time to kind of pause and remind them of your intentions and of like where you stand as their coach. I think a lot of coaches might feel like, how can I avoid being judgmental in these scenarios? And how can I avoid kind of casting my own conditions and my own perspective and my own kind of expectation of my finances onto someone else. And the best way to also approach those scenarios is almost for you to remind yourself again by sharing that with your client, but then also to, again, just remind yourself that like, it's never easy to go into a coaching relationship or even a coaching call and problem solve from a point of being disappointed or holding a grudge or having that judgment. It's never easy. You can never productively solve problems from that space and also level with your clients to understand what's really going on. So it's always easier to kind of drop that judgment and say, okay, it is what it is. We're here. We're like, everything before this is a sunk cost, right? Like there's typically nothing you can do about the past unless it's like, okay, let's return those items or renegotiate. But for the most part, what's been done is done. And so your job is to meet your client where they're at now and problem solve moving forward. Like, what can you do now looking forward instead of feeling that guilt or shame as you reflect on what's happened up to this point? Of course, there's time and place to kind of lesson learn and understand, okay, from what's happened, what feedback can we receive, and how can we approach that differently. But again, I think also a lot of us have that awareness that sometimes we can let that judger come in, but we never want it to seep out into that client relationship. So it's also about kind of resetting yourself before you even go into the call. And then again, you can utilize those reminders so that you can reset the tone with your clients. The second tricky scenario that you might come face to face with is that you'll have a great session with a client. You'll say, okay, here's what we're going to do, XYZ. Maybe you send that out to them and you hold them accountable to doing that. And then the client shows up to the next session and hasn't done any of the work or most of the work that they had agreed to between the sessions. And this is typically going to be reflected in clients who are feeling very avoidant and maybe even have that avoidant personality type where, they're avoiding cracking into their finances because it feels big, it feels overwhelming, it feels like it's going to be a lot of work or it's scary or they're not going to like it. So that is really good kind of foresight to know if you can get to know your client on that level. There's two things that I would suggest doing in these scenarios. So if you sense this as a pattern, or even if it happens one time, it's discussing with the client, okay, what got in the way here? Because what you want to do is understand what is causing them to avoid doing those things. And so if you can ask the question, what got in the way? Instead of asking the client, why didn't you do this, right? That's almost like putting the blame on them. Instead, you can say, what got in the way of you, being able to check these things off? And now we're almost shifting the blame to something else that potentially happened that kept them from being able to do this. It feels a lot less judgmental on them and less like you're the failure because you didn't do this, and more like, oh, something must have come up. Let's reflect and look at that. And sometimes the client will be like, oh no, I just didn't do it and this is why. But what can really help here is by taking that kind of pressure off and letting them really open their mind to understand what truly got in the way. And even if it is an internal thing, you can then start to problem solve that. So going into that scenario even and walking them through, or having them walk you through what's going on in their head. And then, like I said, if it is an internal thing, if it's an external thing, then it's really looking at, okay, how can we make sure that even if that happens next time, we're still able to accomplish the task, because that accomplishing that task is what's going to help us move forward in each of our sessions instead of having to restart every session, right? You can help them see, not going to say that it's a waste of their money for not doing the thing, but help them see that they can make a lot more progress if they're able to make the progress between the sessions and get those tasks done. If it's an internal thing, it's also about helping them reframe how they can think through the process, right? If even thinking through the process and thinking about even getting started on this thing feels overwhelming, then how can we help them reframe what that process really is in order to make it easier for them to take action. And maybe the easiest thing for them is for you to actually break down the task into something even smaller. So it's like, all I want you to do between our next session, or even, all I want you to do before tomorrow is to do this piece of that task. And when you get that piece of the task done, reach out to me and I'll give you the next thing. And by making it bite-sized, that can often help, because again, it's not this big, large thing that they have to kind of think about doing and can't really see how they're going to be able to get it done in a set time frame. You're breaking it down into bite-sized chunks. The other thing, and it kind of goes along with breaking down into the bite-sized chunks, is helping them put these tasks on their calendar and set reminders for them to do the thing, or triggers or habit stacks for them to go, okay, when I do this, then I do this. So they can actually schedule things in their calendar so that they have a reminder that goes off, or an event that they've scheduled to block off the time to do that thing. Or maybe it's a habit or a trigger. So, okay, every Friday I do XYZ. I look at everything that I've spent throughout the week and I categorize that, or I reconcile my accounts, or whatever that looks like. Or every time I get paid, that's kind of a habit stack or a trigger, right? Every time I get paid, we all know if we're getting paid, right? Money's coming into our account. We feel so much richer. So every time I get paid, every time I feel really rich, I immediately fill in the blank. Maybe it's I immediately move $200 from my checking to my emergency savings. So you can help create these reminders, these triggers, these habit stacks for them, and even sit on the phone with them while they put those reminders in their phone or schedule those things in their calendar. And that's kind of my third tip here, is if all else fails, do a working session with the client to get the ball rolling. So if it's just getting started on the process, whatever that task is that you assigned them, maybe it's a little bit of a longer process and they just need help getting started. I have clients who, we all create this in our mind. We think opening an account, another bank account or a new savings account is going to take a lot of effort and work. And the reality is it typically takes 5 minutes, and then maybe you have to wait a couple days to get everything set up or for the application to go through. But triggering the event is super easy. So it's sometimes I'm all right, just open it up right now and let's do it together to make sure that we get it done. Or, oh, you want to start automatically investing your money. Well, let's just do it right now. I'll sit with you to open up your investment account and help you kind of navigate the process of connecting that account to your bank account and setting up an automatic transfer every single month, or however, whatever that looks like. Those are things that if for some reason the client's I don't know how to do it, or it seems like it's going to take a long time, then you can actually sit down with them and do it with them, because why not just get it out of the way? The third potential challenging situation, and we'll definitely touch on this in the sixth one as well, but this one is especially specific, is if the client asks you for investing advice. So I just shared a scenario where you're helping the client connect their bank account with their investment account, which is very much a how-to, and something that obviously by automatically setting your money aside, you're going to establish that habit of saving before you spend, and you're going to be way better off. But if they take it to that next step, okay, I have money in my account now, how do I invest it? That's where the gray line comes in of, am I crossing a line between helping the client manage their cash flow versus giving a client financial advice that I am not able to give because I am not qualified, I am not regulated by the SEC, I don't have the licensure, and that's something where you want to go, oh, pump the brakes. What can we do here? So when it comes to investing, if the client specifically asks you, what can I invest in? You can let them know, that's not something that I can tell you. I can't tell you to invest in this specific stock. I also can't tell you to invest in this specific index fund. That is giving investment advice. By the way, side note, a lot of people are doing that on Instagram and TikTok and may not be realizing that they are crossing that line. So just be careful about that. That is something that is very important, and an ethical and moral line we need to draw, as well as like a legal line that we need to draw in our industry. We cannot tell people what to put their money in. That's not allowed. But what you like, some options that you can do is you can, I would be careful with this, but you can say, here's what I invest in, but this is not saying that you should invest in it. Obviously, your client will probably take that as, oh, I should invest in that too. So that can draw the line. But something I might look at more is providing the client with some education, some resources for them to do their own education and say, something you can say is like, I'm a big fan of passive index investing. That isn't investment advice. You're not telling them, go invest in this specific index, but you're letting them know of a way that they can go about investing, right? Like some people are, oh, I invest in individual stocks and bonds and I just pick everything and I put my money away. And then other people say, oh, I'm a fan of passive index investing. And you can kind of introduce them to the pros and cons, or the risks and rewards of each, and give them kind of a historical average of those things, just to educate them, and then also provide them further education, whether it's education you've created or it's an educational resource that you find really helpful that you can pass along to them. But for the most part, this is outside of the scope of our work unless you are specifically focused on investment education, in which obviously you can provide that education. If it's outside of the scope of your work and that's really not what you ultimately sold to the client in the first place, then you're always allowed to let them know, hey, this is outside of my scope. Here's someone I could recommend you to, or this is who I would recommend for you to look for to learn more about that, or to get actual advice on that. If you want to learn more, I'm happy to send you some resources for you to learn more, and then we can work that into our coaching schedule and accountability for you to do that learning and move through that material. And that's something you can absolutely do as their coach. The fourth situation is a client shows up and they've completely blown their budget or overspent significantly. And you're like, here we are, we got a big problem to solve, or we got a big obstacle to figure out how we're going to overcome. So here's the deal. First reminder, your job isn't to shame or punish your client. You are not a babysitter or their parents. Most likely, if your client has signed up to work with you of their own volition, then you are both adults. So this is not an opportunity to say, oh my gosh, you're such an idiot, you should never see the inside of a restaurant again. Shout out to those who know what I'm referencing there. But your job is really to understand where the client is. So informing your client that your job is to help them now problem solve this situation and make a plan to move forward from where they're at now. So you'll do your job starting from today, and next week or next month when you meet your client again, or when you have your next check-in, you'll do it starting from that day, and so on and so forth. So first and foremost, your job isn't to shame or punish. It's to do the job every time you meet, understanding their current situation. Now, obviously, just like if your client isn't doing the work, you can remind your client, we're a lot better off if we can make progress as opposed to kind of backsliding. And so again, thou shall not punish, thou shall not judge, thou shall not shame your client for how or what they did maybe recently, because who knows, there's a lot of different things that could have happened. But what you can do here in this situation is ask, what got in the way? What triggered this overspending? What triggered this blow? And help your client understand, okay, what can we do? What processes, what support can we put in place to try to avoid this in the future? So you can reflect and learn. Again, that's a great opportunity for you to help your client here. But then reminding your client, my job isn't to punish you for this. My job is to go, okay, using the data and the financial point that you're at right now, as well as emotional, and taking that into consideration, what can we do moving forward to fix the situation and to improve it so that we're not taking steps back, but we can get back to zero, maybe where we started, and move beyond that. So it is important to remind the client that they are paying for this service and their goal in signing up was to make progress. And in order to make progress, they're better off by following that plan. But again, you can dig in to understand what set off the overspending. Is there an emotional gap that needs to be filled elsewhere? How can the client slow down their decision making and action taking so that they can better build habits and change their behaviors in the future and make a plan instead of kind of maybe acting out of impulse? And can you implement any triggers or rules for the client to help remind them to stop, remind themselves of the work that you're doing and the commitments that they've made so that you can progress each coaching session? So that's how I would go about, the blowing of the budget. And honestly, it happens. We're all human. So that doesn't mean anything for you as a coach. And it may not necessarily mean something for your client. It may not mean that they're doomed or that they've royally screwed up or any of those things. I think, again, drop that shame at the door, at the Zoom room hosting, section, and just collect yourself and go into the call with an open mind and willing to explore and problem solve as opposed to blame and shame. Because again, not your job. And they know that and you know that, and you can remind them of that if they are thinking otherwise. The fifth scenario is that the actual budget or cash flow system that you've set up just isn't working for the client. So sometimes the budget just doesn't work for the client's lifestyle or their habits and their behaviors. And that's okay. I always like to start all my clients utilizing a budget that I know is a great place to start and works for a majority of my clientele. But guess what? It doesn't work for 100% of them. And that is okay. So it's better to adjust a budget to meet the client's natural habits and behaviors, right? Figure out what are their triggers and how can we work around that so that you're not trying to change habits and behaviors, but instead work with them, right? So what habits and behaviors have they already developed? Then develop a budget or a spending plan or a cash flow system that can work with that instead of having them develop entirely new habits and behaviors so that they can work with the budget that you've put in place. That just doesn't work. But reminder, it's okay to start with a budget because you don't know what is going to work or not until you get some data, until you get some proof and experience. So again, some clients, it's going to work great. Other times you're going to have to go, okay, well, now let's have a discussion about this and understand your client's process in spending and saving, how they go about thinking of that, and then build a new way to help them budget, check themselves, save automatically, understand the process, all of that so that the tool works for them, right? I remember when I first started my business, I had so many questions on bookkeeping, and I remember going to a seminar and the accountant that was presenting on that said the best budgeting software, but not budgeting, bookkeeping software is the one that you use. So no one is better than the other. Use the one that you're actually going to use regularly. And then that's going to be the best one to go with, at least for now, as you start up. So same thing with budgeting. If you do use an app or you just have an Excel budget, start there, see if it works. If it's not sticking, if it's not working, then identify your client's behaviors, their habits, their processes, and how they spend and save, and then identify, okay, what can we change about our current budgeting plan, spending plan, cash flow plan to actually work with those behaviors and see if you can come up. I know you can come up with a solution there. Okay, the final sixth potentially challenging scenario that you might face as a money coach is that your client gets themselves into a financial situation that is beyond your scope and your expertise. So this is a big one that I know a lot of people fear. And I would say the likelihood of it happening is pretty rare, although there is a good chance that your client might have a question outside of your scope, like we used in the investment example. And so it is still good to know that you have permission to let the client know, like, this is what you signed up for in working with me. That is definitely outside of my expertise, and to refer out, because it would do more harm than good if you tried to help them solve that problem. And it's not helping you, and it's also not helping them. So identify the situation and help the client to understand which professional or expert they can engage to help with the specific situation. I think a lot of money coaches have a fear around saying, hey, like, that is definitely beyond my scope, so you're going to have to find another professional. And then have a fear that, like, oh, well, the client's gonna be mad because that is gonna cost them more money, and they were looking for like a catch-all in me. And I get that. I understand that. We're all frugal and budget minded. And so it can be hard to see that having lots of financial professionals that you pay money and invest in so that you can, make better financial decisions and be, better taken care of, it's hard to see that that's actually going to help you be better off, because all you might see in the beginning, all your clients might see in the beginning, is just money going out of their account. But it truly is an investment, and it's good to help your client frame it that way. But I also think that I would say a majority of my clients, all of my clients, and all of the clients that I've had from a financial coaching perspective, have been understanding of that and have been more than willing to look elsewhere for that expertise and the scope, like the type of work, finding someone whose scope is to do those things. So whether I'm referring an entrepreneurial money coaching client to, find a bookkeeper or find a tax accountant, obviously those are not things that I provide in my money coaching services for the entrepreneurs that I work with. So, I let them know, hey, if you're not going to do this, you're going to want to look for a bookkeeper to help you get all this organized on a regular basis so we can stay ahead of everything in your business. If obviously, like, I'm not really excited about you doing your own taxes, I think as a business owner, it's so beneficial for you to have a tax expert and a tax advisor, a CPA, an accountant on your side to help do those for you. So those are things I let them know, and they're typically, I don't even know why I'm saying typically. They're always like, of course I would. Let me go also make that investment because that makes sense. And on the personal side, these can also apply to my entrepreneurial clients, but financial advisors, mortgage brokers, if they're buying a house, insurance agents, even bankruptcy lawyers or legal aid societies to help with, extreme debt situations or potentially divorce that leads to bankruptcy. Those are all things that are absolutely beyond my scope and my expertise, and I'm always happy to refer elsewhere. I think what can be helpful is, again, letting your client know, here's who you want to talk to about that situation, right? So at least you can kind of point them in the right direction. And then if you do have like a very specific niche or you work in a very localized area, you could even have lists of people who you can refer them to. And you can start building your list, your roster of external referrals for your clientele. And that even more so gives them an opportunity to make it easy for them to go, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, this is someone that you would recommend. Great. Let me go out and have a conversation with them and see if I'm going to hire them. So I think we always feel nervous about that out at the top, but like, it's not as big of a deal as we make it out to be in the beginning. And if you want to make it easier for yourself and your clients, at least understanding who, like which professional to refer them to. And then even if like going a step beyond that, which you absolutely do not need to in the beginning, but as you work with clients, getting some names and some people to actually refer them to, as long as it makes sense, can also be a really great tool for you. And then I would just communicate with the client that you're going to help them on the goals that surround that issue so that they can handle the problem with that professional and then work with you to adjust their new financial life accordingly. So again, maybe it's bankruptcy that they have to deal with and go through, or maybe they're getting a mortgage. Well, obviously they're going to work with a professional to identify what is the most appropriate, what they are able to accomplish through that, all of those good things, but then come back to you with that information. And then you can help look at, okay, maybe they talk to a couple of different like lending agencies when it comes to a mortgage, home loan agencies, and they get a couple different ideas of what, a mortgage could look like for them. And you take all that information and you look at, okay, this is what that means, right? Helping them understand it further, because like any of these things, insurance, investing, mortgages, bankruptcy can still feel like gobbledygook to your clients, and you can help them understand like what this actually means, but then also going, and here's like how these different options apply to your financial situation. So here's what we're looking at if you choose mortgage lender A versus mortgage lender B. So helping them see how it's going to adjust their financial life. And then of course, once they do take whatever choice and implement it and go with it, then again, they're going to come back to you and you're going to adjust that accordingly to make sure it makes sense for their plan that you've created for them. So that's a wrap on the 6 challenging financial coaching scenarios that you could potentially face. And I think they're the most common that we can get stuck in our heads with, which then makes us want to avoid starting or taking on more clients. And I just wanted to share how you can handle them. So we no longer have to use some of these as an excuse to procrastinate or to feel like we need to do more, learn more, do more studying, whatever it is. And now you have a reason to keep moving forward, knowing that like you still serve a really high purpose for changing someone's life and helping them overcome their obstacles and reach their goals. Despite these challenging situations, now you know how to overcome them with your client. So I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope this was helpful. If you need the show notes, you can check them out at wanderwealthypodcast.com. And if you want to join us in this potentially last round for 2022 of the Wealthy Coach Blueprint, we'll be working together one-on-one. You can check out all the deets and fill out the application to take the next step in the process by heading to wanderwealthy.com/blueprint. Thank you so much again for hanging out with me this week. And until next time, I hope you wander wealthy.